Good afternoon. Welcome to TNC Radio.live. This is the Truckers Network Radio Show. And now here's your host, Shelley Johnson.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. Yes, this is the Truckers Network Radio Show on TNC Radio.live, where we offer the entertainment, sports, weather, traffic, news, and information that our commercial drivers want to hear. Today, we have a very special guest who drivers have listened to for decades. Steve Sommers is a legend who followed in the footsteps of his father, Bruce Dale Sommers, who went by the nickname the Truckin' Bozo on WLW in Cincinnati. We're very pleased to be carrying the Steve Sommers Overnight Drive, brought to listeners by Hot Shot Secret. It airs on TNCRadio.live at 11 p.m. Central, midnight Eastern, every weekday. Steve Sommers is so well loved by drivers. He took over for his dad on his show. He's had the hammer down ever since. We're excited to have Steve on my show today. Welcome, Steve. You're a trucking legend. You're carrying on a family legacy. You do a fantastic job. Plus, you have a great set of pipes.
You're making me feel old, Shelley. My goodness, a legend?
Yes, you are.
It's listening to me for decades. I mean, it seems like just yesterday, but yeah, and I'm a little nervous. I'm on the wrong end of the microphone. I'm actually supposed to be interviewing somebody, and I'm the interviewee today. But it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so excited. You know, I personally know a number of drivers who've been listening since your dad was on the air. It's an overnight tradition. And for our listeners who may not be familiar, I wanted to talk about how your dad got started. How did he come up with the name of Truckin' Bozo? I bet there's an interesting backstory there.
Oh, boy, you're going back. It's been a bunch of years, well before he ever started the trucking show. Yeah, I guess technically my father was known as I think they called him journeyman broadcasters. He got into radio at a very young age, and the man, hopefully it's his career. He worked from Miami, Florida, to Seattle, to Southern California, to Maine, and everywhere in between, but he was actually working in, I think it was Kansas City. I can't recall the call letters. It may have been WDAF, but Randy Michaels, the other legend in radio, was his boss at the time. And he was doing traditional, like, country music radio. And he was being a clown one day. And you know how offices had those little cubicles that separate people? At least they did back in the day.
Sure, yeah.
And he did something at one point in time, and he got PO'd about something, and he kicked a cubicle, and the walls started tumbling down, and Randy Michaels, you damn bozo. And I think it was later, maybe that day or the next day, he went on the radio saying, I'm Dale Sommers, the afternoon bozo. And he thought he was being a clown. I'm the bozo, because that's what I was called by Randy. And that was good. He did that for a few hours, and at some point in time, Randy Michaels was fed up. He's had enough. And he comes into the studio, and my father's on the air at this time, and he said, that's it. You're done with this. And he said, well, look at the phones. The phones are lit up. He said, pick up a line. Pick up a phone line there. And Randy picks up the line and says, is this the bozo? And he picks up another line and says, hey, is this the bozo? And that's where he actually garnered the name the Bozo. And from there, Randy Michaels was the one that had the brainstorm to just try a trucking radio show in Cincinnati. He was the top guy there in Cincinnati at the time. With it was J-Corps at that point in time, and they were going to take a shot in the dark and do a radio program catering to truck drivers. They thought at the time, we might get a year out of this. It might just work. And no one at the time ever had any inclination that this would become kind of an overnight tradition thing. It worked for a year. It worked for 2 years. He started in 1984. And from there on out, I think he did the overnight show for 20 years before I ultimately took over in 2004, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
The years go by fast.
Well, you're having fun. That's why.
That's what they say. Time flies, yes.
And it's been a tradition. It's a wonderful place for drivers to call in and just have a conversation.
Yeah, when he started the program, it was traditional, classical, the old-timey country music. The old-timers, Ernest Tubb and Webb Pierce, and it was more of a music-oriented program for a number of years. And I'm trying to recall years-wise. I think 1996 was the year that I actually came in to be a producer for him. It's kind of funny. He needed a producer, and he was known to have kind of a hothead, a temper, and hard for people to work with. And they couldn't find anybody that would work with him. And they thought, all right, well, we'll give his son a shot. He might be able to actually work with him. But quite honestly, I didn't know him all that well because all those years he was a journeyman broadcaster. I didn't live with him. I grew up with my mother and a stepfather. So actually, 1996, when I went to work with him, those were the years where I actually just really started to get to know the man.
So you were able to do some bonding. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and 1996 to 2004, the years that we got to work together. So,
did you always imagine yourself going into broadcasting? Was that your initial passion as a child?
Oh boy, you talk about the ironies. No, not really. I mean, growing up, I knew that my father was in the radio business, and like I said, he would be in this state or that state, and I was actually, my grandfather was a painter by trade. And that's my grandfather on my mother's side. Mm-hmm. And as a painter, he was working painting at a radio station in Cincinnati. It was a Christian radio station. And then me and my uncle would work for him, helping to strip paint off the walls or take down wallpaper and just doing some odd jobs to make some money. We were very young. I think 13, 14 I was at the time. But one day I was working at that radio station. I got to go into the studio and sit down with a guy by the name of Tom Oliver. And I said, how did you get to do this? How do you get to be in radio? Because I was curious about it. And he went back in the back. He got me a license. You had to have an FCC license back in those days. Mm-hmm. Long time ago. See, we're getting old. And I just filled that out, not really thinking anything about it, sent it in. I got an FCC license, and out of the blue, the program director there, they needed what you would call a babysitter. It was 30-minute reel-to-reel tapes, programs. You play one program from the bottom of the hour to the top. They needed someone to, work on weekends and whatnot, just babysitting.
Sure.
And that was my first job in radio. I think I got to turn on the microphone to say, this is WAKW in Cincinnati. It's 5:00. And that's it, and then you go into your next program, that kind of thing.
Right.
So that was my start in radio. And I worked there, for a number of years and kind of worked my way up from being just the babysitter and started doing on air, actually getting to play music and talk to people. And when I go back and listen to those tapes from back in those days, I kind of shudder to think, my, how could anyone possibly listen to this guy?
Oh, sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, I've listened to some of my old stuff. It's like, oh my goodness, it's running really fast. Did I really sound like that? Was I old enough to be in front of a microphone?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
I say that about yesterday. I hear myself from yesterday and think, what? I can't believe I said those things.
Isn't that kind of the name of the game in radio, though? If you actually have something recorded and you go back and listen to it and you say, man, oh man, that doesn't sound real good, does it? I guess we like to critique ourselves is what we like to do.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
When one of my commercials will come on, if my wife and I are downstairs with the radio on and one of my commercials come on, I'll make fun of myself. I'll laugh at that guy. Oh, yeah, listen to him.
You either like the way you sound or you don't, I've kind of grown into myself, if you will. But things I did a long time ago, probably not so much.
Yeah. Well, back in those days, I didn't have the voice I have now. I guess I can say that I was kind of blessed with, what do they call it? A good set of pipes,
That's
good radio voice.
Yeah, you do. You have a great set of pipes. Yes.
I was blessed with that. And when I first started working with my father, and people would say that I started working on weekends, overnights, Friday nights, Saturday nights. And some callers would say, I thought you were the bozo. I thought you were your dad when I was listening to you. And it was almost comical. One day my father was out there, listening to the program on a weekend, and a commercial came on that I had recorded. And he said, damn it, I thought to myself, I don't remember recording that commercial.
Oh, that's funny.
It wasn't him.
So you inherited kind of his set of pipes. That's really neat.
Yeah, that's true. Yes. I was blessed there. Yeah.
Yes, and you're carrying on a family tradition. I want to get into more detail about who Steve Sommers is and about your show and everything else. You're listening to the Truckers Network radio show. We're talking with Steve Sommers of the Steve Sommers Overnight Drive, sponsored by Hot Shot Secret. This is TNCRadio.live. Stay tuned for more coming up.
This info blog on TNCRadio.live is brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. Everything truck drivers need to know about sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is an issue that affects 1 out of 3 truck drivers. Truck drivers who drive tired may be unaware of how much their lack of sleep affects their driving. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration attributes 2.2% of all driving accident fatalities to drowsy driving. While there's not a law in place that requires truck drivers to get testing for sleep apnea, if you suspect you have sleep apnea, stay with us to learn more about sleep apnea and how it can affect truck drivers. What is sleep apnea? Sleep apnea is a potentially serious sleep disorder that causes you to have pauses in your breathing or take shallow breaths during sleep. It's an extremely common issue that affects millions of people in the United States. If you snore loudly during the night or still feel tired after a full night's rest, you might have sleep apnea. According to the Mayo Clinic, the main types of sleep apnea are obstructive sleep apnea, the more common form that occurs when throat muscles relax. Central sleep apnea, which occurs when your brain doesn't send proper signals to the muscles that control breathing. Complex sleep apnea syndrome, also known as treatment-emergent central sleep apnea, occurs when someone has both obstructive sleep apnea and central sleep apnea. Symptoms of sleep apnea. According to the Sleep Foundation, all 3 types of sleep apnea share certain common symptoms. Disrupting breathing, in which a person's respiration can become labored or even stop for up to a minute at a time. Excessive daytime sleepiness, morning headaches, irritability, limited attention span, or difficulty thinking clearly. Many of these symptoms arise because of poor sleep and decreased oxygen levels that occur as a result of interrupted breathing. Some additional symptoms are connected to obstructive sleep apnea. Snoring, including snoring that's especially loud and involves gasping, choking, or snorting that may cause a person to briefly wake up. Morning sore throat or dry mouth. Frequent need to wake up to urinate. Causes and treatment options for sleep apnea. Sleep apnea occurs when the airway becomes blocked while sleeping. Here are some common causes of an increase in airway blockage. Being overweight, sedative medication, alcohol, family history of sleep apnea, smoking cigarettes, sleeping on your back, nasal congestion. If you suspect you have sleep apnea, reach out to your doctor to get a treatment plan going. Avoiding treating your sleep apnea can result in losing the ability to operate a commercial motor vehicle. Most often, treatment plans will require you to have a CPAP machine in your truck. The CPAP machine helps pump oxygen to you while you sleep. In addition to using the CPAP machine, your doctor may recommend exercising, losing weight, or using different oral appliances that help hold open your airways. As a truck driver, it's crucial to take care of yourself because trucking is such a difficult and demanding job. At times, it can be challenging to take care of your health. Sleep apnea is a real issue in the trucking industry. We encourage all drivers to be aware of the symptoms and to get help if they suspect they have sleep apnea. This info blog was brought to you by the Truckers Network on app.thetruckersnetwork.net.
I'm Shelley Johnson with Kathy Tuccaro. You can hear us Tuesdays on TNCRadio.live at 8 p.m. Eastern on Women Road Warriors. And don't miss Steve Sommers' Overnight Drive right here on TNCRadio.live, weeknights midnight to 5 a.m. Eastern. Brought to you by Hot Shot Secret. Welcome back to the Truckers Network radio show here on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly, and we're talking with Steve Sommers of the Steve Sommers Overnight Drive, which is sponsored by Hot Shot Secret. We've been talking about how Steve started and when he eventually took over for his dad, the trucking bozo, on WLW. Steve, how did that transition work? Were you intimidated or up to the challenge? Because you said your dad had quite a strong personality.
Yeah, and I also said I didn't really know him that well at that point in time. I guess we'd have to go back to where I kind of explained my very first radio job at a Christian radio station. I've spent most of my life here in Cincinnati, Ohio. After working at that first station and kind of getting a little bit of experience in radio, I wanted to get into real radio. I wanted to play music and be a DJ kind of thing.
Sure. Eventually,
I worked my way up to, there was a little country station out in Hamilton, Ohio, the Beaver at the time. Doesn't exist anymore. Beaver 96.5. That was kind of my first break into, quote, real radio, playing country music and working weekends. And I ultimately worked my way up to weekends and becoming a producer at WUBE, which is like the number one country station to this day in Cincinnati. It's kind of funny. My name was Steve Sommers, and they had a guy that worked afternoons there that was a guy by the name of John Sommers. Well, John Sommers wasn't his real name. Steve Sommers was my real name, but since he used that name Sommers, we had to come up with a handle.
Right.
And they said, okay, how about Harley Davidson? And I thought, no, are you kidding me? But we did it, and it worked. And I was, for a number of years, Harley Davidson on WUBE. There was a time somewhere in the mix there where, like I said, I was very young when I started. So I'm probably 18 years old or something by that point in time. And I met this little girl in college. I was in my first year of college. She was finishing up her high school at God's Bible School in Cincinnati. And I fell head over heels for this girl. Now, this girl was actually from Chattanooga, Tennessee. She was a work student, as they call it, where she got to come to college. She worked there to get her tuition paid. And we started dating, and the school year ended, and she moved back to Georgia, just south of Chattanooga. It's northwest Georgia. They lived down at the foot of Lookout Mountain there in Flintstone, Georgia, no less. And when she left, I think it was 24 hours later, I had gone into my boss and I quit my job. And I just hopped in my vehicle and actually drove down there. I damn near got there before they ever got back from Cincinnati. But I showed up there, and it's hard to condense everything into such a short interview, but I actually ended up moving in with them and lived with them for a year until I ultimately married that young girl that I couldn't live without.
Oh, that's so
and
great.
While living there in Georgia, I got a job in radio. There was a Christian station, a gospel music station, WFLI. There in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I worked there for weekends. Also had a gig where I worked overnight at the Golden Gallon, the convenience store. That was a fun time, but tried to make ends meet. Well, lived down there, moved back to Cincinnati. I came back to Cincinnati and got on my hands and knees pleading with my old boss that I just quit on for my job back. And he so graciously let me come back to work there in Cincinnati. And from there, boy, we kind of moved back and forth. I think it was 1991, 92. We moved back to Georgia. Times were tough. I lost my job at WUBE, and I said, all right, we'll move down with your family again. We'll give it a month and see if I can find a job. That's about the only time in my life where I wasn't in radio. I found a job at a heating and air conditioning wholesaler, supply shop, delivering parts and what to HVAC repair guys. Mm-hmm. And when I was delivering down there, this was in Dalton, Georgia, where I found the job. So it was a decent drive from Chattanooga to Dalton to work there. But I drove past this little radio station on the corner of Walnut Avenue on each, making deliveries. And one day I said, I'm just going to stop in there and see about a radio job. And go in, introduce myself, and tell them my experience and what I know about radio. And it was like, where have you been? We've needed somebody so bad for so long. Yes. And ultimately I ended up, they gave me the morning job, 5 a.m. till 9 a.m., 5 to 9, 5 to 10 working it was Real Country 98.9 there in Dalton, Georgia. So I worked there until 1996. And from that 1996 was the year I was working in Dalton, and my father needed a producer. Ultimately, after pleading with Randy Michaels day after day, calling, saying, yeah, I'd like to have the opportunity to do that job. Yeah, they called me up to Cincinnati. Now, they hired me in to be his producer, making less money than I was making there in Dalton, Georgia. But I said, I'll take the less money because there might be a future here.
Sure. Yeah.
And ultimately, that turned out to be probably the best decision I ever made, because here I am today, now, all these years later. So 1996, I produced for my father, started doing weekends until 2004. He retired. Now, after doing overnight for 20 years, it took a toll on his health. I don't know if you're familiar with working overnights, but it's a tough gig. It really does take a toll on your body physically. And so he couldn't do overnights anymore. That's where I stepped in.
Were you a bit intimidated, or were you just ready to just pick up the torch?
Oh, for crying out loud. I mean, in 1996, I knew absolutely nothing about trucking, the trucking business. But over the years working with him, I learned gradually, day by day, learned a lot. But I really wanted the opportunity to pick up the torch. So by the time 2004 rolled around, I think I knew quite a bit. And I did tend to take things a bit of a different direction. Maybe I should go back to 2001. And you remember this day of September 11 of 2001? That's the day the overnight truck show kind of changed. As I said, we played a lot of music, and it was more of a comedy, entertainment kind of thing. That particular night when this country was attacked, my father was still working. He came in that evening, and it's like, all right, drivers. We always talk to drivers by their handle, the monkey gouger, the sticky booger, and dirty diapers. And hey, we're not using handles tonight. We're going by our names. We're going to talk to John. We're going to talk to Joe. It was a serious conversation. We did not play any music. That was essentially the night the overnight truck show turned into more of an actual talk program, talking to drivers versus being a music entertainment kind of program.
Interesting. And it gave a forum for drivers that isn't always available. Let's face it. This is a great place where everybody could get together and just talk.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's how we gradually started from that point forward. We cut back on the music more, still played some music, because it's hard to fill 5 hours of programming in an overnight hour. Overnight, 5 hours of programming is a lot to fill.
That's a long shift.
Playing some music is able to fill some time, if you know what I mean. But eventually we worked our way down to where it became no music. And it's just, we talk to the drivers. And obviously my idea was to move into more of a news magazine kind of form. You can't talk about trucking nonstop for 5 hours all night long. You have to talk about the things that drivers have to deal with out there. And you get a 5-minute news update at the top and the bottom of the hour, and you get the little tidbits. We have the opportunity to break things down and talk in depth about whatever's in the news on any given day. And that's how we kind of fill the 5 hours. You talk some trucking, I'll throw out the story, what's going on in the world of politics, what's going on in this. We could talk about the Olympics right now because that's going on. Super Bowl Sunday's coming. We can talk about all those things and still get what's going on in the trucking world at the same time.
Absolutely. Well, you're talking about life, and that's an important thing.
Yes.
And I love the format.
And over the years, I say we, it's the listening audience. I've got obviously some regular callers, those that might, that some might call a couple times a week, some may call every night, but we've become like a family. And the year 2020 rolled around, and when things kind of changed at WLW, you'll have the opportunity, as some of my listeners will start listening to you all's program. That's kind of what we're trying to do, introduce ourselves to one another.
Right.
Yeah, you'll find out that it's kind of humbling to me when they say, Steve, when you were gone, I felt lost. We didn't know where to go. They felt like they were in the abyss without our overnight program and all the drivers that were so used to the camaraderie they had, I guess you'd call it.
You're a friend and a family member in the night, and that's so very important. And it shows what a great job you're doing, and your dad would be very proud of you. We do have to go to break here. I want to talk more about your show. We're talking with Steve Sommers of the Steve Sommers Overnight Drive, which is sponsored by Hot Shot Secret. You're listening to the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. Stay tuned for more coming up.
This blog on TNCRadio.live is brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. 4 things to consider before becoming a hazmat tanker driver. The demand for truck drivers is higher than ever. There are many different types of truck driving jobs. Whether you're a new driver or if you already have a couple of years' experience, it's never a bad idea to get new skills and endorsements. Hazmat tanker jobs are one of the many truck driving jobs. If you're considering becoming a hazmat tanker truck driver, here's some things you should know. What is a hazmat tanker? Hazmat truck drivers haul, deliver, and dispose of hazardous materials. Hazardous material can include things like gases, explosives, corrosive chemicals, poisons, and radioactive materials. Hazmat tanker drivers are not limited to hauling only hazardous material. They can also drive a non-hazardous tanker. Have the right requirements. Becoming a certified hazmat tanker driver will require you to add specific endorsements to your already existing CDL. You'll have to undergo training that is specifically designed for transporting and handling hazardous materials. After obtaining your CDL, you'll have to go through a background check and complete the application requirements. The application requires ID proof of being at least 21 years old, proof of citizenship or legal residence, a medical exam and eye exam. You must pass the hazmat knowledge test too. It's more stressful. Regardless of what you're hauling, being a truck driver is a stressful job. Safety is a top priority for truck drivers, especially for hazmat tanker drivers. Hauling hazardous material means that accidents or spills are much more severe. Hazmat tanker drivers are under much more stress and caution than drivers that haul non-hazardous material. Drivers need to be extra careful and need to plan their routes before driving. It requires a lot of skill. Truck driving is a difficult career and it's not for everyone. Being a truck driver already requires a lot of skill. For hazmat tanker drivers, there are specific skills that you'll need in order to be successful. Aside from the technical skills, hazmat tankers should also have personal skills. Some personal skills include being punctual, detail-oriented, and patient. These skills will make you a better driver in the long run. You make more money. Hazmat tanker drivers make more money on average. This is because more experience and skills required to haul hazardous loads. According to Salary.com, the average salary for a hazmat tanker driver in the United States is just over $63,000 a year, but the average salary range falls between $55,000 and $72,000 a year. Salary varies from education, certification, experiences, and additional skills. This info blog was brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net.
This is Heath Sanders, and you're listening to TNCRadio.live.
Welcome back to the Truckers Network radio show here on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly, and we're talking with Steve Sommers of the Steve Sommers Overnight Drive that's sponsored by Hot Shot Secret. Steve, I think we left off in the year 2020 in our last segment. You've been giving a great history on how everything's evolved. Where do we go from here? What are you doing now, and how did you get the Overnight Drive show?
2020, the year we all want to forget, and we all thought
no
2021
doubt.
21 was going to be better, wasn't it?
Oh, well, they promised us that. Yeah.
And now here we are into 2022. Well, let's go back to 2020. And now I had been doing the overnight program solo with, after taking over in 2004. So I've got a few years under my belt. I started getting the world of politics. And if you've noticed in this day and age, there's this thing called cancel culture. Yeah. Not everyone likes Steve Sommers. Not everyone likes my political views. I'm a conservative, and I'll just leave it at that. I was a Trump supporter, and election time of 2020, big times leading up to that. And, some people had this idea to start calling San Antone and complaining about this overnight guy who's this radical left wing, right wing, white, hard right kind of guy. And they try to tell me you got to cut back on your political talk. I actually got a memorandum that I'm not allowed to talk about politics. And I said, oh, man, how's this going to work? Because you've got to talk about what the people want to talk about.
Sure.
And not just the truck drivers. I mean, the truck drivers are affected by what happens in Washington, D.C., as we know, every day. I tried for a few weeks to kind of back off, and gradually I thought, okay, the dust is settled. I'll kind of work my way back in and started getting more into politics. Long story short, Election Day of 2020 rolls around, and if you'll remember, there was a little bit of controversy that surrounded that election. Friday morning, it was November I guess that would have been the 6th or 7th, right after Election Day. Well, I had talked after the election because I sat there and I shared the numbers and I watched as the numbers were coming in on election night, and some very strange things were happening. Pennsylvania was a great example. We all know there was this big dump of numbers that came in at 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was witnessing it myself and sharing it with the audience. And then it was Arizona, and it's Wisconsin, and something's going on. Mm-hmm. And I think ultimately what transpired is, I believe the management in San Antonio felt as though, and not everyone, that they didn't want you talking about any controversial things. There was no fraud. There was no shenanigans going on in this election. Ultimately, I got a phone call 8 o'clock on a Friday morning, that Friday after the election, and the show was terminated. Mm-hmm. Just like that. Phone call. I mean, not even to come in and give you a thank you for all your years of service, what you've done for us at this station, the millions of dollars you've made.
Yeah.
You're done.
That stinks. Yeah.
And so from there, it's like I had to get on the phone immediately. The odd thing was Chris Gabrelchik had been the founder of Hot Shot Secret. He had been working with me for several years. He could tell you, he's a great interview sometime maybe, mm-hmm. that could tell you about how his business, by coming in and being on our program, the America's Trucking Network at the time, actually brought him from working in a pole barn. First night he came in, and he was coming in for just a short interview, and he was on for a bit, and I said, well, wait a minute. I said, he was ready to leave. And I said, no. Hey, look, Chris, we've got plenty of callers here. He spent the entire program with us and talked about his product and what it does and what it could do for your truck. And if his story's true, which I believe it is, he said when he got back to Mount Gilead the next morning, because he had drove down to Cincinnati, they had orders for product, and they had several skids of orders for product, and they had never had that before. I mean, he said, I would sell a bottle here and a bottle there. He was down to his last dime, almost ready to give up on trying to get this Hot Shot Secret business on the road. Mm-hmm. And so over the years, I would interview Chris, and here and there, he would come into the program. But again, that's a great interview for you to do sometime.
I'd love
but
to
Chris
talk to him about that.
The last time I had him in the studio, which for a couple of months before I got that dreaded call after the election, he was kind of inquisitive about, what would it take for me to have my own radio program? What's it take to, do that? How much would it cost, kind of thing? So he was just kind of inquiring. I said, well, you first of all, you have the salary for the host, and normally you have to pay the cost for a producer. And I don't know. I had no idea what it would cost. I think it's costing him a lot more. But I gave Chris Gabrelchik a phone call the day after I was dismissed. That was a Saturday. And he said, yeah, I heard about that. I saw it on Facebook. You got let go. And I just kind of was reaching out to him, which led to my and my wife going to Mount Gilead to have conversations with him. And he said, let's try this. Let's give it a shot. He said, I'm going to put Steve back on the air. It's a good platform for us to be able to talk about our products and promote. Obviously, I had the trucking industry that listened to the program. Right. And he said, I can kind of have a corner on the market. We can talk about Hot Shot Secret because they have the additives for everything, gasoline, diesel, transmission, you name it.
Yep.
But we can talk about our products, and we don't have to talk about Shell Rotella or Chevron Dello or any of the other products, if you know what I mean. So
sure. Yeah.
That's kind of like where we got the start with the overnight drive program. sponsored by Hot Shot Secret. I would not be here today if it were not for Chris Gabrelchik and Hot Shot Secret.
And we're so glad you are here. And I know the drivers have been applauding that decision. It's carrying on a tradition, and it's so very much needed. As drivers are going around at midnight, they want to listen to stuff like this. It's just so important.
One of the big challenges has been finding the audience we had. When you're on a 50,000 watt blowtorch, as we call it, during the overnight hours that could be heard from the Rockies to the East Coast.
Yeah.
I have, social media is a good thing. I mean, using Facebook and whatnot, we've been able to kind of find many of our previous listeners. But I think that's where our coming in with you at TNC Radio, I guarantee there's listeners to your platform, to this platform, Shelley. Oh, and before I forget, by the way, congratulations on this is your 300th episode today. I'm on your program on kind of a historic program.
You are. Thank you so much. Yes, I have loved doing this show. This is terrific, and this is appropriate that you're on the 300th episode. Thank you.
So by reaching out and being able to get on your platform, finding some of our other previous drivers, that's the hard thing we're trying to do. I mean, I've got thousands of friends on Facebook, most of which I don't know, but the audience we had out there is so much greater. And one step at a time, we're trying to find all those thousands of listeners to bring them back into the fold and realize, hey, we're still here. We're not gone.
That's right. And this is exactly what's needed. And we're excited for our listeners, too. Introducing you to them and letting them know this is out there. And Steve's got a great show, and it's a great place to just have a conversation. And everybody's a family. It's kind of like a big CB radio, isn't it? In a way,
I guess you could call it that. Yeah. So, the interesting thing is I've got my midnight to 5 platform, and for those that listen on a nightly basis, when I ended at 5, they've got to find something else to listen to. And that's kind of like right now, I've been talking how that's where you guys come in. Hey, you've got tons of trucking programming. I mean, it was so cool. I was listening this morning when I wrapped up where you were actually supposed to be interviewing Alex. Is it Debogorski or Degorski?
Debogorski.
How do you say it?
Yeah. Yes.
He was, I guess he's stuck on the ice roads out there somewhere.
That's
and
right.
So you had his other buddy from Ice Road Truckers that filled in. That was a great interview. I loved that.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes. Oh, Todd's great. Todd Dewey. He went out to GBATS with us, and we had a blast.
How about that? But yes, so now the listeners have trucking programming, which I think this is something that many of them were not familiar with. So I think it's a great deal.
It's a great marriage, and we're excited to bring your show to our listeners and your listeners to see what we can do, because we're out there for the commercial driver, and we are certainly we want feedback too, what the drivers want, because we're here for them. If it weren't for trucking, commercial drivers, this country would stop. Let's face it. They're our frontline workers. I firmly believe that.
Absolutely. Well, that's the whole conversation about what's going on with our friends north of the border right now. I mean, it's a touchy issue where you don't want to be blocking traffic, but I mean, they've got a legitimate argument there, what they're talking about. And that's an issue that affects not just the truck drivers, but millions of people, as you well know. I'm sure you've probably had to talk about that here and there, but mandating things and shutting down the Ambassador Bridge. You were discussing how on any given day, you got to find things to try to entertain the drivers. What do you want to talk about? What they might be interested in? I've always felt like as I'm scouring through doing my preparation for any given night, I can read this headline and that headline. It's like, okay, I don't care about this. I feel like if I'm interested, other people will probably be interested as well. And that's what we try to share. Because every truck driver is affected by the same thing that non-truckers are affected by in everyday life out there.
Absolutely. It's very, very true. We have to go to break here, Steve. We're talking with Steve Sommers of the Steve Sommers Overnight Drive, which is sponsored by Hot Shot Secret. This is the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. Stay tuned for more.
This blog on TNCRadio.live is brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. 6 safety tips for truck drivers while driving in the rain. As a truck driver, you'll experience driving in dangerous weather conditions. Driving in the rain creates difficult and dangerous driving conditions for truckers. It's important for truck drivers to be alert and cautious when driving in the rain. Check out our 6 safety tips for truck drivers while driving in the rain. Slow down. Wet roads make it difficult for a driver to control their truck. A good rule of thumb is to drive 5 miles per hour below the speed limit. In some cases, you might have to drive more than 5 miles an hour below. Professional truck drivers adjust their speed according to the weather. When driving in dangerous conditions, only drive the speed you're comfortable with. Leave space. Leaving the appropriate amount of space between each vehicle will give a truck driver enough time to react. A fully loaded tractor trailer traveling at 65 miles an hour needs about 5 seconds of space to stop. Drivers will have to increase the space between the cars while driving in dangerous weather conditions. Maintain your vehicle. Having your vehicle routinely checked will make driving in the rain more safe. Frequently check your truck's tires to make sure they have enough tread. Also, check your windshield wipers to see if they're working properly. Avoid standing water. Driving through standing water increases the chance of hydroplaning. Hydroplaning causes a driver to lose control of the truck and can result in serious injuries. Standing water also hides potholes and other debris that might be on the road. It's important to always avoid standing water while driving in the rain. Wear your seatbelt. Wearing a seatbelt is a requirement for all truckers, especially in dangerous weather conditions. Eliminate distractions. While driving in the rain, eliminate all distractions. If you drive with the radio on, turn the volume low so you can concentrate. Avoid touching your GPS or looking at it for long periods of time, and avoid using your cell phone. This blog on tncradio.live has been brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net.
At Hot Shot Secret, we share the science behind common diesel problems and their solutions. For example,
diesel particulate filter regeneration.
The DPF catches particulates left over from combustion. The DPF regeneration cycle cleans the filter with temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. A computer sensor triggers the DPF regen, which is often accompanied by a loss of power and fuel economy. The frequency of DPF regens are in correlation to the cleanliness of the fuel burn. Under heavy operation with the dirty burn, DPF regens can occur multiple times per day. Hot Shot Secret Diesel Extreme Fuel Additive promotes a more complete combustion, creating fewer emissions and therefore fewer DPF regens. Vehicles using Diesel Extreme experience 83% less DPF regens.
Hot Shot Secret Diesel Extreme is available nationwide at truck stops, fine farm and auto stores, and online at hotshotsecret.com. Hot Shot Secret, powered by science.
Welcome back to the Truckers Network radio show here on TNCradio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly, and we're talking with Steve Sommers of the Steve Sommers Overnight Drive, which is sponsored by Hot Shot Secret. Tom, I know you want to talk to Steve, but before we do that, I want to give a shout out to the Carolina Monkey Gouger, who paid me a wonderful compliment earlier this week when you were on Steve's show. It was so much fun to speak with Monkey Gouger on my show last year, and I wanted to give him a special thank you for his very kind words about my show. I would be remiss if I didn't. It was just amazing. So I will throw it to you, Tom.
Well, we ought to have him back on here sometime soon, huh?
I'd love to. I'd love to.
Yeah, that was a great interview. Like I said, I listened to that one when I was in the hospital, and this is a guy who faced a fair amount of challenges in his life. And I was facing a challenge when I listened to him, and it just kind of was inspiring to me to get up out of that hospital bed and get going again,
He really did have an inspirational message. We were worried about you, Tom. No doubt about that.
But made it through just fine.
Yep.
So, Steve, you were talking about getting the subjects out there that people care about. When you're doing show prep, it's late at night, right? I mean, most people have already started going to bed and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, you're picking up, looking at the wire services and so forth from kind of the end of the day. Do you find that the late night press releases and stories are sometimes a little bit different than what you'd find during the day?
Essentially, I guess I'm able to gather everything that's happened over the past 24 hours. I mean, I'm getting my news at the same time as I'm looking for what might be interesting to others. But maybe that's why sometimes I can find things that people say, well, I hadn't heard that. I mean, we're breaking some of the new stuff to them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, because that's kind of what I've noticed too on your show is sometimes I find things, and that's where I was going with this, is I find things on your show that you're either the first to report it, or perhaps maybe it was one of those things that others didn't see it and you kind of put it into a different perspective. And I was like, oh, that's a pretty good story. I wish I would have mentioned that on one of our programs today.
Well, and it's not just me doing my preparation. Like over the years, first thing I go to is my email, and I need to thank all those. I have some regular dedicated people that are scouring the news as well, that will send me links to stories. Sometimes I'll get the same story from a half dozen people, and other times I'll get a story that I might have missed. And so thanks to all those contributors out there that help put the program together every night.
Oh, you fell into my desperate trap there, Steve. That's exactly what I was hoping you were going to say, because those same people, if you ever want to drop us a note at info@tncradio.live with those stories, we'd love to grab those too, because we're like you, Steve. We want to find those things that matter to those in the transportation industry and those who are out there driving truck all day, and whether they're a long hauler or in town or whatever they're doing. We're always looking for what is the best story. What's of interest here. And Shelley will tell you that, we're even during our breaks, we're working through, hey, did you see that such and such story? And no, I didn't see that one yet. And emailing each other links and all that kind of stuff as it goes on. And it's hard. And there's a few of us, it must be even tougher for you, Steve, to put things out there. So do you find it sometimes difficult, I guess I'll put it that way, to come up with the story that you thought, oh man, everybody's going to love to talk about this, and it just kind of it's a lead balloon. It's like you put it out there and it doesn't go anywhere.
Every single night. That's why it's better to have more preparation than you're going to need than you can use. But I'll throw that big story out there that I think, man, the phones are going to light up, and nobody wants to talk about it. So you just move on to the next topic. That's the good thing about I think my program is just. You notice a lot of talk radio programs, they want to get on a topic. We're going to talk about this. Mm-hmm. And for their full hour or 2 hours, that's all they want to talk about. We'll shift gears every 5 minutes. And if someone calls and wants to talk about something else, hey, change the subject. We're here to talk about what you want to talk about.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we do too. In the afternoons and the mornings, we're doing the weather and keeping people up with what's going on with traffic and that kind of stuff. But at the same time, we like to have ongoing conversations amongst ourselves on the things that we think are important and interesting. And sometimes we get great feedback on it. Sometimes crickets. And I guess if I knew the difference, if I knew how to get one over the other, I'd have written the book and I'd be rich, and, because I'd have cracked the, magic nut of radio, right?
Exactly.
Crickets, those darn crickets always seem to appear every now and then.
Yeah, you think you got, this is going to be great, and then you find out that nobody really cares. Okay, and then it's the story you think nobody. Yeah, we could talk about that. Nobody's going to really care, and then everybody's jumping on that story and thinking, oh no, this is the best story ever. Okay. Whatever works,
What are your favorite things to talk about, Steve? Do you have maybe things that are more interesting to you? I mean, obviously, everything can't be exactly what you want to talk about. Just kind of curious.
I don't know that I have a favorite subject or whatnot. I mean, there's a lot of listeners that tune into me for the what's going on weather-wise. I get a lot of accolades because drivers need to know what's happening.
You do a great job with that.
I do constantly I have numerous different. I use the normals, AccuWeather, the Weather Channel, and things like that. But I mean, if there's a severe weather outbreak, I'm on the Kamala, the actual live reports, tornado watches, tornado warnings coming in, and we can follow those things. WSM out of Nashville, they eliminated Marcia Campbell here. And I don't know what they're playing now, but there was a tornado outbreak impacting Nashville, Tennessee one night. And I had people calling me saying, Steve, I'm listening to you, getting the weather for what's happening here with me in Nashville, because they weren't even talking about it. So we try to cover the nation, try to keep everybody covered out there.
You do a fantastic job. You do a much better job than most meteorologists. And that's a tough word to say, meteorologist.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Well, Steve, if you want to hear Marcia Campbell, she is available now that she's on TNCRadio.live every Thursday night at 6 o'clock Central, 7 o'clock Eastern.
Yep.
I noticed that she's coming up, I guess, Friday morning. You get I get the encore after on my program, correct?
Yeah, so right after you go off, she'll be on, and this week, I think she's talking about 1999. Ooh, and so she takes a year and talks about the best songs from that year and some of the things, the news items that happened there, and looks back, how much did a Big Mac cost in 1999? And it's always stunning when you hear some of these prices from back in the day and you think, really? It was just $1?
Right, yeah. As we're seeing with gas prices now.
Yeah.
In the not so distant past, when the prices were a whole lot lower, not to mention diesel.
Oh yeah, diesel's out of control right now.
National average rolling in on $4 a gallon right now. It's unreal.
Yeah.
Yes, it really. It's just downright scary. But that's another topic. Oh my goodness, we only have about 2 minutes here. How would you like to wrap it up, Steve? You could give a quick blurb about your show for our listeners, because what you offer is absolutely fabulous.
Hey, I mean, we're on midnight to 5 a.m. Eastern time. So at the midnight hour, we fire things up. I do rely a lot on my listeners. And I think by chatting with you and Tom today, the idea is we're going to maybe find some new listeners, those that maybe had never even heard of the program, those that may have been familiar with us from years gone by and said, I had no idea Steve was back out there.
Right.
And we'd love to have him join us here from midnight to 5 Eastern time.
Yeah. And Steve, they can use our app, or they can go to your website, and tell them your website, Steve.
overnightdriveradio.com.
overnightdriveradio.com. You can also get to that from our app. And so if you're not able to hear Steve live, but you're driving in the mornings, let's say, you can pick up and hear his podcast, which from any particular night. You can do that any number of different ways. And so we make it really easy. Even from our app, Steve, they can now, while they're listening, just press one button. Your smiling face shows up. They press another button, and they're connected to your studio. How about that?
You got to love modern technology, right?
Oh, it's fabulous.
It is. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of the last guys to ever embrace getting on, first of all, the internet. And I believe it or not, I did not have a cell phone, a smartphone, till just probably a little over a year ago. Can you imagine that?
Hey, you wanted to do it the old-fashioned way. There's nothing wrong with that.
That's true. That's true.
You wanted to just talk to people, not text. You don't talk with your thumbs. You wouldn't have a job if all you did was talk with your thumbs, right?
Exactly. That's it. Yes.
Oh, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Steve. I really have enjoyed it. We've been talking with Steve Sommers of the Steve Sommers Overnight Drive, which is sponsored by Hot Shot Secret. It airs on TNCRadio.live at 11 p.m. Central, midnight Eastern, every weekday. We're so excited. You're listening to TNCRadio.live. This has been the Truckers Network Radio Show. Stay tuned for more coming up. Thank you for listening to another great interview on TNCRadio.live and the Truckers Network Radio Show. All of the material you hear on TNCRadio.live, on our website, our broadcasts, or our podcasts are copyrighted. There can be no distribution without the express consent of TNCRadio.live and its partners. For inquiries, write us at info@tncradio.live.